my name is Bill Coulter and welcome to Personal Portraits. This week's guest again is Dermot O'Reilly. Welcome back to the show, Dermot.
Thank you. Back by popular demand.
That's what it is, for sure. We covered a lot of territory on the last show, and at the same time, we never made it to Newfoundland.
Never made it out of Toronto. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So how did that step go from Toronto to Newfoundland?
Well, like as I mentioned, we began to get a little serious about it and thinking in terms of career when we were approached by the Irish Rovers people. And then we began to tour with the Sons of Erin, and we were up in northern Ontario, and we went to Montreal, and where else did we go to? Kingston, Belleville, Brockville, and a few other gigs in between. And then, personalities became a little problem, and nothing too serious, but just that it wasn't working out. So Fergus and Gary and myself, we went one way. Started off a group called O'Reilly's Men, and Ralph kept the name the Sons of Erin, and he continued on travelling with a band called the Sons of Erin. O'Reilly's Men, I lost my voice at one stage, and I wasn't in the best of shape, so for to perform, and Fergus and Gary met Don Sullivan and became known as Sullivan's Gypsies, and I went to Montreal and got involved in other groups there, and as time went by, Ferguson and the boys, they were on the way back, they had been to Newfoundland, and on the way back to Toronto they called me and asked me would I join Sullivan's Gypsies, and so I did. And I left Montreal and went back to Toronto, and Sullivan's Gypsies was a foursome. We made a recording. That was the first recording that I was involved with. It was called The Leprechaun, a song written by Don Sullivan. And then Dennis, in the meantime, had come from Ireland, and to cut a major long story short, he joined Sullivan's Gypsies. He was with the Sons of Erin, ironically, and he joined Sullivan's Gypsies, and then there was a five-person group, and we made another recording.
Do you have those recordings, by the way?
I do, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Must be something.
Yeah, and we went to Montreal, went to New York, went to Ireland for a couple of years in a row on a tour. And again, me knowing Mr. Personality came into the picture, and that group began to disintegrate. And Gary left first, and then Sullivan left. And while we were in Newfoundland, Sullivan's Gypsies were performing in Gander, and we were due to perform in St. John's, and Don went one way and we went the other way, and we got to the Strand Lounge but he didn't, and so technically that was the first time Ryan's Fancy performed, although we weren't called Ryan's Fancy, we were still advertised as Sullivan's Gypsies. So we did our stint there, and just began to go downhill from then, and we became interested in going to university. And as this was happening, there was a thing happening in Toronto where a lot of the clubs that we would play in, they were beginning to hire people for a lot less money than they were paying the established bands. So the whole scene just fell apart. And so we decided that we'd leave Toronto and come to Newfoundland as a threesome. And so we had some commitments in Toronto when we went back as Sullivan's Gypsies. And we fulfilled those commitments, and then left Toronto in February of 1971. We came to Halifax, played in Halifax for a while, and then we moved to Newfoundland, drove up from Toronto with our sound system on a Volkswagen Beetle, 2 speakers strapped to the roof, and our cases and guitars and stuff. And on our way through, we played in Halifax again, and drove across the island to St. John's, and registered for Memorial University and began to play in the Strand and down the Southern Shore. And I should say, by the way, that before that, Sullivan's Gypsies had been to Newfoundland, and we made quite a few friends there. We travelled, played in the Chignick Lodge in the West Coast.
Yes, yeah.
Played in Cornerbrook and Gander, the Flyers Club in Gander. And
but why didn't you stay in Halifax? I mean, was it just because the connections had developed a bit stronger in Newfoundland?
In Newfoundland, I felt quite at home in Newfoundland. It was like being halfway home, you know. You were still in North America, but you weren't. And it was, I felt very comfortable. The people were much the same as they were in Dublin, in a sense. The accent was I was taken aback by that, you know, and I felt that this was the place where I felt the most comfortable. Another thing was when I lived in Toronto, my name was peculiar in Toronto, Dermot. You know, it's not a name that you'd hear a lot in Toronto. So one of the first people I met when I came to Newfoundland was in Gander. His name was Dermot Malloy. And I felt great. Oh, this is great. He understands my name. And I began to find out that Dermot is quite well, it's a name that's not uncommon here. And but again, it was mostly the people and mostly the way of life and the attitude of the people that made me want to stay. And I enjoyed my couple of years in Memorial as well. Well, not a couple of years, 3 semesters, I believe. And I enjoyed that, and it turned the key for me and gave me a new perspective on a lot of things. So basically I felt comfortable here.
Yeah. But I mean, it must have been difficult in the meantime, going to university, and presumably you were still singing. Was that getting kind of a heavier and heavier schedule?
Well, the same thing happened again, you know, like as what happened in Toronto. We began to get gigs and we began to miss classes, you know, and we made a couple of recordings, and so we still maintained our communications with Halifax, and we would travel quite a bit to Halifax and to Cape Breton, and so that kind of eat into our university time, and we eventually gave up the school with the intention of going back separately. And then we got TV shows with CBC, and we met this chap, Manny Pitson, who produced the George Hamilton show, several shows out of Hamilton, Ontario. He happened to be in Halifax, and out of that meeting we had a series on CTV. It was a syndicated series out of Hamilton, Ontario, with Tommy Makem, called the Tommy Makem Ryan's Fancy Show, and that was for 3 years, at least 3 years. Then we became involved with CBC television, and we had a number of series out of St. John's.
Did they go national, by the way?
Yeah. Eventually they went national, and then there was a change in management in CBC, and then a change of attitude, and a new series came into being called Canadian Express. And in the Canadian Express shows, there were excerpts or components of the show were made up of, like, we would have maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes from Newfoundland, 20 minutes from a station in Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan. So we would have a segment each week on the Canadian Express shows. And so that was when we got into television. And it was quite a busy time.
Well, when I said at the start of last week's show was that you know, some people are at that age now, they don't remember Ryan's Fancy, you know, but I mean, I grew up when Ryan's Fancy were really, well, actually I can remember Sullivan's Gypsies, and the stir that was created, it was just like, it was just sort of that real strong sense of energy on the stage and fun, and everyone was just into it, you know. But it's almost difficult to describe that energy, it was just, it was really intense, I know, for my friends. But I mean, you did, I don't think people realize how many things that you were involved in. I mean, you were talking about those television shows, all that traveling, you were recording, you were performing in clubs.
Yeah.
It must have been, and plus scattered trip up Southern Shore after
after a night's work.
that's right, you know, and I'm sure there was more singing on that. But I mean, it must have been incredibly intense and really stressful, I suppose, too. And,
well, it was, but we weren't. Well, I can only speak for myself, but I still had a certain. It was still a bit of a lark to me. I don't mean that in a flippant way. I was still having fun with it, you know. It was something that I enjoyed, and but getting near the end of Ryan's Fancy, it was beginning to take its toll. In the family-wise, I should go back a little bit, Bill, and mention my family, because it was in November of 1968 that my wife and children finally came over from Ireland, and that was after we finally felt secure in the knowledge that we thought we were being looked after by the management, the Irish Rovers management. So that made it easier for me to make the decision that this is grand now, it's time for them to come over. You know, we didn't lose contact. We were we were writing all the time, and the odd phone call. Telephone wasn't as big then as it is now. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, so they joined in 1968. During that bad period in Montreal, when I lost my voice, my wife and kids went back to Ireland. And then when Sullivan's Gypsies got on the go again, again we had a manager. So that meant that there was a little more confidence in the future. So again, Anne and the children came over. And but by the time we left, Sullivan's Gypsies disbanded, and we came to Newfoundland. I was here for a couple of months, and then Anne and the children moved to Newfoundland. And my third child was born here in Newfoundland. And so that makes up the three daughters. But no, I must say, it began to get a little difficult on the family.
Sure.
And sometimes the family would travel with us. But it wasn't the same, you know. It was allegedly it was a holiday for the family, but when you're working at night, you can't really get into anything during the day. Mm-hmm. So we had some good times, but I'm not sort of saying that it was all bad. But it just wasn't a great set of circumstances, and we began to get a little older and began to think about the future, and like other professions, in the same way, there's a certain cut-off time when you have to sort of look and think about down the road. So we began to consider the possibility that we might like to do other things. And then we began to look towards splitting up. And
well, Dermot, we're going to have a little break here now.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll talk about the direction you took after you came to that decision.
Okay.
So we'll be right back.
You're watching Cable 9, your community channel.
Welcome back to the show. I'm talking to Dermot O'Reilly. Dermot, when you play with Ryan's Fancy, like I was saying before, it was you did an awful lot of things. You know, I mean, you recorded. I don't know how many albums did you record?
13.
13 LP albums.
Yeah.
I mean, you had, you know, national TV shows. You were touring. You
toured
were
the States, toured Canada, toured Ireland every year for 5 or 6 years, and we were on radio shows. As I said, TV series, a number of TV series, and you know, a lot of special events. We performed for the then President Ronald Reagan in Ottawa, one of those command performances, and played for Trudeau, and we moved around in a pretty exciting sort of an environment, you know. And but it was a lot of fun. I learned an awful lot. stuff that there's no university that exists that could have taught a lot of the stuff that you learn and pick up.
You got your degree, but it wasn't from Memorial.
We don't have a piece of paper to prove it. Got 13 albums, though.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is amazing, you know. I mean, and again, I don't think people realise how intense that was and how many things you did, you know. And I think that if other groups did that, they'd sort of.
I think we had so our appeal, I guess, as Ryan's Fancy was that we were between two generations. We were allegedly mature individuals, and but because we were going to university, we had that youthful connection.
Sure.
And we were singing songs that were older than our audience's memories, and a lot of the older people liked this as well. So we had this. We were kind of like a bridge between two time frames.
Yeah.
And that was our appeal. And we also made it a point of playing in the outlying areas, playing in the smaller communities, and putting on concerts, you know, outside of St. John's and in out of the way places. And that was one of our, I think, appeals. We were bearded and long-haired, you know, so we had this appeal to the younger generation, and we were having a lot of fun. You know, that was one of the things. We always like to have a laugh, no matter how bad we felt getting on stage or whatever. We always sort of, well, again, I can speak for myself, but I always try to think that this is a first night. This is not the end of a tour. The audience don't know that you're tired. They don't want to know.
No.
Because they've been waiting to come to the gig. They don't want to be told, oh, the band are tired, you know. So we would keep the energy level high, and the fact that there was three of us helped, of course, because if one guy was a little down, the other guy would pick it up, you know. So we had this good interaction, and we developed a style that involved communicating with the audience as opposed to singing song for song for song. We interspersed it with a bit of humour and had a bit of fun, you know, and poked fun at local news events, and we always made it a point to recognise if we go into a town, we'd check out, you know, what was happening, and we'd use a reference, you know, into one of the songs about a street or something like that, and in the local community, and people would like that.
Sure.
You know, at least you're taking the time to get interested in who they are and where they are. So we had a lot of fun, but it was pretty intense, and eventually it took its toll. Not among ourselves. We were still very good friends, but just it was time. It was getting repetitive. We began to do a circuit that seemed only yesterday, and then the material got a little jaded as well. We felt that, you know, as time, when we would try new material, sometimes the people didn't want to hear the new stuff.
Sure.
You know? So artistically, we got to a bit of a dead end, and again, the domestic situation. We all, well, again, myself, didn't particularly want to continue. Kids were growing up. You go away
Sure.
for 3 or 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and you come home, and you know you had to reintroduce yourself to your family, and so it was difficult on the families. So eventually it came to an end. And
what did you do, like when the time come? You know, like.
Yeah, well, we agreed at a certain time. We said we'd give ourselves 2 years, and once we said that to ourselves, we began to relax a lot, you know, and we started to enjoy it again, because you knew there was an end to it sometime, you know. So we did that, and then I began to ponder what I was going to do, and I decided that one thing we used to do as a band was when we'd go to a community that we hadn't been there before, we'd get to know some of the people, specifically maybe some school teachers, and we'd invite ourselves to play for the kids during the lunch hour or something like that. And I began to say this would be a nice way to continue on. So, but I didn't want to just walk into a school with my guitar. I thought I'd do something a little more complex than that. So I devised this audio-visual presentation using 3 projectors and a large 9 by 12 foot screen, rear projection. And I put together a show called the Rosetta Road Show, and I travelled around Newfoundland with my slideshow, travelled up to Labrador even, and brought it to Cape Breton on an experimental basis. And it was very well received. Didn't make a lot of money at it, but I enjoyed it, you know, which is sort of one of the ironies about the music business. You can have a huge crowd and not be enjoying it, or you can have a handful of people and have a great time.
Right.
You know, but I enjoyed it while I was doing it, and there was this, I still have the setup, and I hope to get it on the road now in the fall and into the new year, because the mechanics of it are still there, and there is still an audience for that kind of a presentation.
Sure.
Then the fact that slides don't physically move, there are limitations to it. So I began to ponder the idea of television. And I got involved in a television show. I produced a show, co-produced a show with CBC, a journey across Newfoundland called Rigs, Jigs and Songs from the Heart. And that became a video cassette, which is still available. And another show I did on Labrador, a similar kind of a show, which I also co-produced with CBC. And
well, that must have been quite a change, Dermot. Though I mean, getting into that. So.
Yeah. It was still related to music. I knew that whatever I had to do after Ryan's Fancy would have to have some relationship to music. So music will always be my motivator, and all kinds of music. I'm not specifically a folk singer as such. You know,
Sure.
I like all kinds of music, and I like performers. In all kinds of music. I like the energy that people put into what they do, and I pick up on that and I enjoy that. And so then out of the 2 TV shows, the idea of a studio came to me, because with a TV show you have your editing and all that, so you need a facility for that, because the substantial amount of editing time goes into a TV production. And of course sound and film and video go together. So I figured that if I combined those elements and had a studio that could be an editing facility, production centre, and a recording facility at the same time, that sounded like a good idea at the time. And so I got involved with recording. And since I've had the studio built, I've produced, or at least 13 products have been released from here. Not all produced by me, but in recent months now, the most recent products have been Rick Harwood from Carbonear, the Bowman family, a really good group called Fine Crowd.
Oh yes.
They recorded downstairs. I produced that, and also the latest one from the studio was Mark Hiscock and Chris Andrews. It's a CD called Newfoundland.
Yes, a really enjoyable album, must say.
So I'm currently working on my own recording as well, and I hope to have that out hopefully before Christmas.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. But the thing is to get at it. You know, when I'm doing other things, it's hard to get the time. You know, you can't run into a studio. You say you got 15 minutes. You can't run in and do something, because you know, again, you sit down. That's 15 minutes. Again, you just think about it. That's 15 minutes gone. So you need to have that time. And it's a business, so it takes a lot of time just to administer the whole thing. But I still enjoy music, and I still have a lot of fun with it, and I haven't lost that particular love for the whole industry. And it's nice, especially the younger musicians coming into the studio. It's nice to be able to impart some of what I've picked up over the years, to pass that on, and I usually try and help them as much as I can in other aspects of the recording, not only the recording, but just ideas about, you know, give them a little bit of encouragement, and I like to pass on all of that expertise that I've stored up over the years.
I remember talking to Fergus one time. He's somewhere out around somewhere, I don't know where it was, somewhere out around the bay, but some young people in the community heard that Fergus was in the community, and they were interested in putting a group. They had a group together, and they went over and asked Fergus for, you know, like, how did you do that song? Or we really liked that recording. And Fergus was kind of not amazed by it, but he was glad that they were tuning into the music of Ryan's Fancy, but also the fact that, well, this is how we did it, and this is how we approached it. And they were really intrigued by it, you know.
Well, I think that's very important to pass it on. That's what it's all about. Music it's reflective of who we are and where we're from, and it's reflective of how we feel about life and about things. So continuity is a component of the whole music industry that I like, that business of passing it on and continuing it on. So it's nice, it's encouraging when young people do. The same thing happens to me if I'm playing in a club. Sometimes, you know, people say, oh, my grandfather really likes your
Well, Dermot, on that note, we're after running out of time, and it's hard to believe that we've done 2 shows, and I'm sure we've got more to talk about. But anyway, it's been great having you on the show, and best of luck with everything in the future.
I appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Respect your community. Respect yourself.
You're watching Cable 9, your community channel.